Alright, in example 4 here we finally get to graph one of these things. When we take a look at this equation, we can see right away that it's going to be a hyperbola. You've got each term being squared here, both the y and the x, and then also a minus sign in the middle. If we take a look at the y term here, it's first, it's before the x term, and so this definitely is going to open up and down, so it's going to look, something like this. What I'd like to do first, though, is try to find the center. And if we can find the center, that really will help us to be able to graph this. So this one turns out to be just 0, 0. There's nothing by the y and the x here. Next, what we need to do is find A, B, and C. It says also find the foci, so we'll have to do that. If you don't have to find the foci, you actually don't have to find C, I guess, to be able to graph it, but it's kind of nice to be able to do that. And then we're going to use asymptotes totally to help us to graph this thing. So A is just going to be the square root of whatever is underneath the first term, so that would be 4. B is the square root of whatever is underneath the second term. Could be bigger than A. In this case, it's not, but it could be. So the square root of 9 would be 3. To find C, that's going to be the square root of A squared plus B squared. So the square root of 25, which is just 5. So if we look at the vertices here, we've got our center right here, and then our vertices, we need to go, in this case, up and down by A. So our vertices are going to be at 0, 4, and 0, negative 4. So here's how it's going to look. We're going to go up 1, 2, 3, 4, so there's 0, 4, and then down 1, 2, 3, 4, and so there's 0, negative 4. The foci, those are just going to be at 0, 5, and then we've got 0, negative 5. We're just going up and down from the center by C, which is 5. So if you wanted to plot those, you could plot those right here and right here. Sometimes I get a little confused which point I should use when I'm graphing. Of course, you want to make sure that the foci are going to be furthest away from the center. Asymptotes, if we figure out the asymptotes, for this one, it's just going to be y. There's nothing subtracted or being added to y, plus or minus. And then what we need to do is just look at y, and whatever is underneath there, that's 16, we're going to write the square root of that in the top. It's always the change in y over the change in x for slope. And whatever's underneath the x, the square root of that's going to be 3. And there's nothing being added or subtracted to the x here, so we can just write an x. When I'm doing this visually, though, to help in graphing the asymptotes, I actually don't do this part first. This is kind of what we did in the past few examples, so I wanted to stick with that for you. However, if you want to take a look at B here, B is 3, and so what we can do is we can go from each one of our vertices, in this case, right and left by B. So we can just make 4 points. And that's going to be the 4 points of that box. If you watched one of the concept videos in there, I talked about kind of forming the box for these asymptotes. But what you can do then, I'm going to try to do this in pencil. Hopefully this does show up on the video, just because the asymptotes are not part of the actual graph, and I'm afraid that I might smear a little bit if I try to use a marker here. These are a little bit worn down. They're not as fine as they once were. But all these are just helper lines. So if you want to do like dashed lines, that's fine, or lightly colored, that's cool as well. Whatever you do them in, just make sure that they're not prominent, because they are not part of the actual hyperbola. So what we can do now is we can just graph this thing, and we're going to give it a nice shape. We're going to try to make it curved here, but this curve is going to get close to, but not cross, the asymptote. So it might look something like this. We're going to try to do the same thing with this side. Now this is not perfect, but it would be pretty close if you actually, type this into a graphing calculator. And I apologize if my head got in the video there. Hard for me to draw this a little bit further away. I like to put my head right over the graph so I can get a nice line drawn. So if we read directions again, we graph the hyperbola, and also the foci. So I guess if we needed to graph those, it's kind of a little bit ambiguous here whether we should just find them or graph them. But here they are. So there's the foci, there's a vertice, and there's a foci, and we've used our asymptotes to help us graph.